Story time. Let's listen to story time. Let's listen to story time with Dr. Sewer. Story time. Let's listen to story time.
Greetings and welcome to another story time with Dr. Sewer. I am Dr. Sewer, and this story is Jimmy's Rhythm and Blues, The Extraordinary Life of James Baldwin. It's written by Michelle Meadows and illustrated by Jamil Law. The copyright date for this book is 2024 copyright date on this book by Michelle Meadows. Here we go. Jimmy's Rhythm and Blues. Home is brick brown Harlem, uptown trains rumbling by. Born and raised in the heart of Harlem, James Baldwin grew up playing on the rooftop, living in books, dreaming about changing the world. Friends and family called him Jimmy. Jimmy lived in a cramped apartment where he took care of his little brothers and sisters. In between changing diapers and giving bath, Jimmy flipped through the pages of books. He read everything and everywhere, often holding a baby and a book at the same time. David Baldwin Sr. didn't like Jimmy reading books other than the Bible. His father was a preacher and a harsh, rigid man. Jimmy's mother was quite the opposite. Bertis smiled at Jimmy, protected him, and showed him love. Outside in cement gray, hard, cold concrete crumbling, cracking. Along with preaching on Sundays, Jimmy's father worked at a soda factory during the week. Jimmy's mother cleaned houses. David and Bertis did the best they could, but like many families during the Great Depression, they struggled to feed the children. Sometimes Jimmy led his little brothers on a hunt for old, cheap bread to eat. In those same streets, Jimmy felt the sting of violence and racism early in life. When he was 10, 2 white police officers searched him in an empty lot and left him on the ground. Whether he felt frightened, lonely, sad, or worried, Jimmy let his emotions pour from his pen. He wrote everything and everywhere with his left hand, sometimes scribbling on paper bags. Words soothed him. And whenever he could, Jimmy slipped away to his favorite hill in Central Park, where he escaped, wondered, and imagined the future. Writing is electric blue, brilliant, bright swirls of letters and words, flying, flipping, flowing to the beat. In elementary school, Jimmy stood out. Kids picked on him, noticing he was small, shy, and smart. His teachers noticed something else. Jimmy had a gift for weaving words together like musical notes of a song. He wrote songs, poems, plays, and stories. Writing gave him a voice. When he wasn't in school, Jimmy devoured books. In the 135th Street Library, home of the personal collection of Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, a Puerto Rican-born Black historian. A theater teacher named Orilla Winfield nurtured Jimmy's talent. Her nickname was Bill. When Jimmy wrote a school play, Bill directed it. Bill also took Jimmy to museums, movies, and plays outside of school. Bertis was pleased with Bill's support and Jimmy's interest in the arts. One day, Jimmy shared his deepest dream with his mother. "I'm going to be a great writer when I grow up." In junior high school, County Cullen and Herman Porter saw Jimmy's talent too. Both men lifted him up. County, a prize-winning poet, was a French teacher. He told Jimmy about his trips to France. In County's literary club, Jimmy learned poetic form and spun imaginary tales. Herman named Jimmy editor of the school magazine. He took Jimmy downtown to the library on 42nd Street to do research for an essay tracing Harlem's history. When people said Jimmy didn't belong downtown because of his skin color, Herman showed Jimmy he had a right to be there. Church is glimmering gold, gospel songs, stomping feet, tambourines tapping. As Jimmy grew older, he became scared of many things. He was scared of his father because of his bad temper. He was scared of the streets because crime lurked on the stoops. He was scared of his sexuality because he loved a boy. Jimmy hoped church would shield him from his fears. Soaking in the rhythm of gospel music and the language of the Bible, Jimmy became a preacher, a star in the pulpit at age 14. He liked having an audience. Preaching made Jimmy feel in control of his life, at least for a while. When he wasn't preaching, Jimmy took the train from Harlem to DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx. Working on the school's magazine, Jimmy wrote about topics that weighed heavily on his heart and mind: race, religion, identity, and family. And he read. He read books by Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky, American-British novelist Henry James, and French novelist Honoré de Balzac. He read about France and dreamed of going there one day. Jazz is passion purple, paintbrushes, bebop blues, singing, swinging soul. On the advice of a friend, Jimmy met a painter. Knocking on Buford Delaney's door in Greenwich Village changed Jimmy's life. Buford was kind. He introduced Jimmy to jazz and the blues, to the stories of Black people tucked inside music, to art, color, and light. He showed Jimmy how to see with an artist's eye. Buford became like a father, and once the two found each other, they never let go. A year later, Jimmy decided he wanted to write more than he wanted to preach. This meant letting go of what his father wanted and facing his fears. One Sunday, Jimmy preached his last sermon and tiptoed out of the church. Over the years, Jimmy also thought of becoming a musician, a painter, or an actor. But he saw writing as his special gift, a calling to capture the voice of his ancestors, stand up for oppressed people, and push the world to change. For Jimmy, writing was an act of love and discovery. Writing helped him discover true power, the power of his mind, the power of his words, and the power of his stories. And with his power, Jimmy felt unstoppable. It was time to take a leap. With Buford's help, Jimmy moved to Greenwich Village. While waiting tables, he met other creative souls and became known as a charming, lively storyteller. He talked and laughed with friends at the restaurant late into the evening. At home, Jimmy wrote through the night. He liked to write longhand on paper with no lines. Then he typed up passages as he went along. Writing book reviews and essays helped pay the bills. Writing a novel about a son, his father, and the church helped Jimmy explore and understand his life. He wrote about what he knew and felt in his heart. A young woman connected Jimmy with Richard Wright, a famous author who lived in Brooklyn. Richard read about 60 of Jimmy's pages. Then Richard and his editor, Edward Aswell, at Harper & Brothers helped Jimmy get funds to work on his novel, a $500 grant. The publisher, Frank McGregor, even took Jimmy out to lunch to celebrate. But Jimmy's initial hopes vanished when the publisher eventually turned the book down. Jimmy sank into a pit of despair, wondering whether he would ever realize his big dream. Paris is fog gray, unknown possibilities, new beginnings, airplane roaring. By 1948, Jimmy had suffered setbacks, heartbreaks, the blues, including the death of close friends and his father. Jimmy was determined to survive and find his rhythm, and he knew he couldn't do it in America. At age 24, he packed his bags and headed to Paris, France. When Jimmy arrived in Paris, he found the freedom to discover who he wanted to be. Paris was not without hardship, but for the first time, Jimmy felt relief from the relentless discrimination in America. With only a little more than a pen and a notebook, he wrote in hotels and the Café de Flore. In Paris, Jimmy fell in love with Lucien Happersberger, a painter from Switzerland. On a trip to a Swiss village, while Lucien painted, Jimmy tapped away at the keys on his typewriter with the beat of blues and jazz music in the air. He listened to the records of Bessie Smith and Fats Waller. Sometimes he read pages of his book aloud to Lucien. The main character, John Grimes, is a poor 14-year-old boy from Harlem who becomes a preacher and has a strict father. John looks out over his favorite hill in Central Park and dreams, just as Jimmy had done in his childhood. Jimmy had been working on the novel off and on for a decade. In Switzerland, he finished writing the book in 3 months. With Lucien by his side, Jimmy mailed the book to New York. Go Tell It on the Mountain was published soon after in May 1953. Jimmy dedicated the book to his mother and father. Rage is red fire, fire red, burning, boiling, blazing, heat rising up. Jimmy went on to publish many more books, and no matter where he lived, he always cared deeply about the struggles of Black people back home. One day, he saw a photo of a teenager named Dorothy Counts in the newspaper. An angry crowd harassed her as she made her way to school on September 4th, 1957. The hatred and racism shocked Jimmy, inspiring him as he began a tour of the southern states. Jimmy interviewed Southerners, observing the devastation of white supremacy, oppression, discrimination, abuse, and segregation. His mission was to bear witness to the truth. He marched, protested, and brought people together to raise awareness about justice and equality. He became a leading voice of the civil rights movement, writing and speaking eloquently about the fight for freedom. When Jimmy's essay collection, The Fire Next Time, was released in 1963, the book deepened the nation's understanding of the Black experience in America, delivering urgent warnings about the dangers of racism. Jimmy captured the nation's suffering, the hopes and dreams for love and humanity, energizing people of all ages and races to open their minds to new ways of thinking. Home is stone silver, south of France, peaceful, healing, welcoming, rocking to the rhythm of the sea. But after the assassination of Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Jimmy was devastated. In 1971, he moved to a house in the village of St. Paul de Vence. Overlooking the valley of the Mediterranean Sea, his house became a place of refuge. Friends and family gathered around his warm welcome table in celebration of joy, love, and inclusion for all people. From the streets of Harlem and to his travels all around the world, Jimmy shared his rhythms and blues with compassion in his heart and a pen in his hand. James Baldwin touched lives and changed the world. The end. Thank you for listening. This has been Dr. Seward. Story time with Dr. Seward. Thanks for listening. See you next time on another Story Time with Dr. Seward.
without the sewer.